Frequency Podcast Network. Stories that matter, podcasts that resonate.
A successful trip. That's the way the federal government is describing Prime Minister Mark Carney's visit to the White House this week for trade talks with the U.S. But despite this framing, there's no tariff deal yet. On Tuesday, Prime Minister Mark Carney arrived to President Trump's front door and was greeted with a smile and a handshake before the two leaders made their way to the Oval Office for a chat ahead of a working lunch. As cameras gathered, it seemed like everything was going well, with Trump heaping personal praise on Carney and making comments like this.
I think they're going to be very happy. We have a lot of things that we're working on that people don't talk about. They talk about, competitiveness. She's a very competitive person. And they talk about things that we don't necessarily agree on. But I think they're going to walk away very happy. I think so.
Trump also spoke about Canada and the U.S. being in a natural business conflict on things like autos, but he also talked about working it all out. In the end, Canada-U.S. Trade Minister Dominic LeBlanc says both sides agreed officials would intensify talks towards some specific agreements.
The principal areas would be steel and aluminum and energy.
Reports say the energy aspect to that could be reviving the Keystone XL pipeline. And despite all that, the opposition Conservatives are pouncing, calling the visit a failure for not producing a deal, and accusing the Prime Minister of leaving some sectors by the wayside in the effort to try and break through Trump's tariff plan. So where do things stand? Is a deal even possible? And how much more patience do voters have with no results on the table? I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and today on The Big Story, I'm speaking with Frank McKenna, who's deputy chair at TD Bank, but has previously served as Canada's ambassador to the United States in the mid-2000s, and before that was premier of the province of New Brunswick for a decade. Thanks very much for being here.
Pleased to be here.
So let's start with, I guess, a general question. How do you think the meeting went between Carney and Trump?
Well, the proof of the pudding will be in the eating. But based on early returns, I would say it's a 10 out of 10. The chemistry seemed to be excellent between the president and the prime minister. The work teams that have been set up seems very positive, and all in all, it looks like a very, very positive direction.
You mentioned the chemistry there. It certainly did seem less awkward and way more friendly than their first meeting back in May at the White House. Definitely a far cry from the relationship we saw between Trump and Justin Trudeau. How does that personal relationship play when it comes to Canada trying to land a deal with a politician like Donald Trump?
Yeah, I'm told by people who were there that it probably was even better than it looked on camera. It was a very, very warm greeting that our prime minister and delegation received. And so that's good news. Look, tone at the top matters. It's not the only issue because both countries have to represent the interest of their own countries in their own unique way. But tone matters a lot, and over a lot of years, I've had a chance to observe that. I saw the relationship that Brian Mulroney had with Ronald Reagan, and that helped overcome some real rough patches. And I watched the relationship that President Bill Clinton had with Jean Chrétien, for example, George Bush with Chrétien as well. And I watched the way in which a lot of really almost insurmountable obstacles got smoothed out.
Now, it did seem to go rather well, but I mean, I guess the fact of the matter is, after months of talks, the only movement that we've actually seen in this trade dispute has been the U.S. increasing tariffs on Canada while we tried to give up some of our retaliation in order to get a deal across the finish line. But it's yet another promise after this meeting of intensifying talks, but we've heard that before. People may be a little bit forgiven for thinking we're getting strung along here, maybe. Do you think that, the longer we go without a deal, it's going to hurt Prime Minister Carney politically here at home?
Look, there are always going to be critics, as there should be. That's the job of people in political life and even representing interest groups. But the dogs bark, but the caravan moves on. And at the end of the day, the government will be judged by the results. And based on what I know, and I'm hearing quite a bit from parties involved, we're headed in a very positive direction. And we can't forget, even though it's trite to say it, that we do enjoy the lowest tariff rate of anybody in the world, on average around 5%. Nobody in the world is even close to that. So at the present time, we've got some pain points around those specific sectoral tariffs, steel, aluminum, autos, and softwood lumber, etc. And it would be wonderful if we can get those straightened out, because they affect real lives. Real people are being hurt. But the vast majority of goods continue to cross the border from both sides tariff-free.
Now, you're a former premier as well as a former ambassador to the U.S. representing Canada. You know how politics works. How much runway do you think the Prime Minister might have, though, left with voters? Because a statement sent out by the Prime Minister's office said these talks may not be so imminent, that they're going to continue it in the weeks and weeks ahead. So how much runway do voters really give the Prime Minister when we are already seeing polls showing the Conservatives now neck and neck with the Liberals again?
Well, again, I think we should focus on results, and that's how the Prime Minister will be judged. But currently, we do enjoy that the umbrella of CUSMA, which helps make it easier to take the time and get the deal right. Politics is politics. There will be pressure, and there should be pressure. But there's pressure going both ways. The United States has pressure too, and the passage of time only intensifies that. I think the Prime Minister will be judged on results.
From everything that you've heard about where talks stand, and you may be well more connected than I am on this, how confident are you that a deal can be made here?
Well, I'm more confident now based on what I'm hearing, because the pressure is mutual. I would repeat what's in the news. American farmers are hurting because of tariffs, and the government's going to have to write a big check to subsidize them. People who use steel and aluminum are hurting. There are a lot of constituents of the president across the United States are hurting. So they have deal pressure as well. What's interesting, I find, is that it's a bit of back to the future. One of the items that's on the table currently is energy, Keystone XL in particular, and whether or not that pipeline would carry another 1 million barrels of oil down to the United States of America. That was the major motivating factor back in 1988, 89, when we did the original free trade deal, U.S. wanting energy security. So I think it's kind of interesting that we've come full circle, and the Americans are starting to understand that energy security and Fortress North America is a very, very powerful tool in dealing with the rest of the world. And we can provide Fortress America and energy. So having those playing cards on the table seems to me is very, very helpful. And along with other energy sources, it could be uranium, could be some of the hydroelectric, etc. We're the battery for the United States of America. We provide them with their energy, with their steel, aluminum, all the raw materials that they use to produce goods and jobs. So I think there's a recognition now starting to come in that Canada is not just a supplicant here. We're an equal partner. In fact, we're a major contributor to the United States economy.
And I want to dive deeper into those details as well as Keystone in a moment. But just before we get off the more general questions here, is there hope that tariffs are eliminated, or should Canadians come to terms that this will just be about reducing the tariffs that Trump is putting onto our country? Kind of like taking Tylenol doesn't heal a cut, but it can help make it manageable.
Yeah, talking about Tylenol is probably not a good thing, but this president particular lack of affection for it. We'll see about that. Again, we have a lot to offer. There are no tariffs on oil because they need our oil. There's no tariff on natural gas. They need our natural gas. No tariffs on potash because they need our potash. So the question will be whether or not there are going to be any tariffs, or whether they'll be de minimis. If the tariff is 5% for a lot of a lot of our commodities, that wouldn't be an obstacle, even 20 or 30 for some commodities. But for other ones that have very low margins, it would be fatal. So it depends on what the tariffs are. It depends on what quotas might be established. It looks as if we're headed towards a managed trade relationship, which I think is unfortunate in a free trading world. But that may be what we're headed for, and we just have to get the best deal we can. In the meantime, we need to do this, but diversify. And the best way we get the best deal with the United States of America is having the ability to move our commodities and our goods, our money, and our presence to other parts of the world.
Okay, we'll have more on the big story in a moment with Frank McKenna, who is currently the deputy chair of TD Bank, but previously served as Canada's ambassador to the U.S. and before that, premier of New Brunswick. Now let's talk a little bit more about the goal of the government, at least in the immediate term with these talks. It appears the strategy is to get a breakthrough on steel and aluminum first, then chip away at other tariffs. That was first reported by the CBC, and then I believe Dominic LeBlanc, our Canada-U.S. trade minister, confirmed that in his news conference after the meeting. Is that a smart move in your eyes, or could that create problems both in talks and domestically, since every other sector is definitely going to say, hey, well, what about us? Why them first? And would there be a point maybe when the U.S. negotiating team can still hang stuff over our head to get more of what they want?
Yeah, I think it's important that we make some progress on steel and aluminum because they're real pain points for us. Steel particularly is seeing the loss of thousands of jobs, potentially a loss of jobs. Aluminum, we're more competitive in many ways, so it may be a little less urgent. But if we could get solutions around those commodities and move on to other ones, I know for a fact because Minister LeBlanc has told me that softwood lumber is really important to him, and he would like to get that issue on the agenda, which it hasn't been for some time. But we have a Canadian consensus now around softwood lumber, so maybe we have a chance of having a discussion about that. I would like to see the auto sector as well moved into the queue and become an important part of the discussion. And remember, not only do we need relief from tariffs, we need relief from anxiety. And if getting a solution to 1, 2, 3, or how many of these issues would result on both sides of the border in consumers and investors calming down and being confident, that in itself would be a powerful win.
Yeah, and you spoke there about autos. It's something I wanted to ask about as well, because Trump, during that nearly half-hour Oval Office chat, went on at length about auto manufacturing and talking about it coming back to the U.S. Now, he did say as well that he wants to work something out and that he wants Canada to do well also, but, the very next day, his Commerce Secretary appeared at a Toronto conference virtually and said America first, Canada second when it comes to autos. So should people in that industry be concerned? You had mentioned earlier about possibly a more managed relationship. Could that mean possible more cuts and more problems in the auto sector ahead?
Well, I think it's a crying shame that the U.S. side doesn't seem to understand the delicate balance. But what does U.S. production mean? In Canada, we have an auto plant, or maybe more, that produce a finished vehicle, but let's say 75% of it even is composed of U.S. parts. Is that an American car or not? We've gone beyond that. We've got to the point where Mexico contributes vehicles or parts. Canada, it takes a carpenter to build a barn. Any jackass can kick one down. And a lot of smart people in the auto sector and political leaders have built a really strong structure around an integrated auto system in North America. Would the Americans say, yeah, fine, all the cars are going to be done in the United States? And we'd be happy if in Canada, the 40 million people there buy their vehicles from China or other places on the planet? I don't think so. So there has to be some respect for the fact that Mexico's a huge market, Canada's a huge market, and that we've got a carefully constructed edifice now that works for everybody. So be careful about knocking it down.
Now, another part of the strategy from the Carney government has been to drop the stick that was retaliation and start to dangle more carrots. And one of the big carrots right now that you addressed earlier is the Keystone XL pipeline. Is that a project that does get things across the finish line for Canada here? And how difficult will that be? It's good to talk about it, but it will take a lot of time. There are a lot of regulatory approvals in Canada, things like that, as well as in the U.S. But Trump seems to like it, but we still don't have a private sector proponent for it yet after the last project was scrapped. So where do we go from there?
Well, all good points. First of all, there is social license, not consensus, but generally speaking, social license, because this project was approved in Canada before by Justin Trudeau and his government. And it's supported by, of course, the oil sector. It was also supported before by Donald Trump and his government. So we start with having that base of support. So that's one thing in its favor. Secondly, it, I believe, addresses a political problem within Canada as well, and that is the West wanting more access to markets for oil, more egress, so to speak. And it does address that issue. So that's good as well. The third issue, of course, is that it allows for more oil production to take place hand in hand with some type of grand bargain around environmental controls such as pathway or methane emissions. So that can be a good thing. The bigger problem that we will have is that right now the United States says the trade is imbalanced between Canada and America. Well, that's somewhat true, but it's only because of the amount of oil we ship. So if we ship more oil, is the United States going to turn around and say, okay, you're really imbalanced with us. We need to take it out on you in tariffs or something else. And so we need to know we can trust the Americans on this. And then in terms of a proponent, you're absolutely right. There's not a private sector proponent because the private sector has had the rug pulled out from under it before at great cost. TransCanada and the province of Alberta both lost a lot of money on the last abortive attempt. So there would have to be pretty hard guarantees or backstops from government to ensure the project is going ahead before they put their hand up, in my view. But if it makes commercial sense, if they're appropriately protected on the downside, if producers support it and want it to happen, I would think there's a good chance of this one happening.
One thing that conservatives are pushing for right now is for Canada to get rid of some of the environmental laws to help make a more attractive economic proposal for private sector companies, such as getting rid of the emissions cap, which they say would allow them to produce a lot more. Of course, there's still talk about carbon capture storage and the Pathways project that you mentioned earlier. Does the Carney government have to sacrifice some of our environmental laws in order to help make this work more?
Look, I think if we're pragmatic and reasonable, we can have increased production and be an energy superpower, which the Prime Minister wants, but also be an environmental leader to the world. Alberta's not only home to a lot of oil and gas, it's home to some of the world's most sophisticated environmental companies, clean tech companies. And I think that could be a major export to the world. But we shouldn't get hung up on dogmatic solutions saying you change this law, change that law, or else. We should concentrate on results. If we can end up getting a big increase in oil production and egress to markets in exchange for that, methane emissions and or Pathways project of carbon capture sequestration take place, we should say, yeah, that's a good, practical, pragmatic result. We can have it all if we don't get dogmatic about how it gets done. But we can accommodate a lot of competing interest here if we're reasonable people. And I think reasonable people are now working on these files.
And then the last thing I wanted to ask you about is the Golden Dome, something President Trump has talked about several times. Dominic LeBlanc was asked about it at his news conference after the White House meeting, saying, have we signed on? He said, well, we haven't signed any papers yet, but it sure sounds like that's where it's heading because of a lot of the language that we've heard from the government. Is it inevitable in your eyes that we will officially join this North American missile shield plan from President Trump? And how much more could that help in getting across the finish line on the other tariffs, not just steel and aluminum?
Well, I think everything is on the table. We want a trade relationship, which is mutually beneficial, and we want a security relationship, and we have that now in large measure with NORAD, and it'll be enhanced even as we have more icebreakers and Coast Guard vessels and do more to protect the Arctic. So it's totally rational for us to agree to discuss a mutually beneficial defensive tool, the Golden Dome. But we'd be very naive if we did that without knowing a lot more, understanding the technology, the cost sharing, how this would all work. I think we need to understand all of those things, the implications, the global implications of that. It's a big, complicated, expensive project, and we would be responsible to tiptoe into discussions, but we're far away from, I think, a final deal. And then again, we have to know what is our relationship like with the U.S. going forward? Are these trustworthy partners? Are they people we can do business with? And is their word good? And I think it's very appropriate for us to be part of the discussion around the Golden Dome.
Frank, I know you're a very busy man. I really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts.
Okay.
That was Frank McKenna, a former Canadian ambassador to the U.S., former premier of the province of New Brunswick, and the current deputy chair at TD Bank, speaking with me about Prime Minister Carney's visit to the White House and his efforts to land some sort of trade deal with President Trump. I'm Cormac Mac Sweeney, and that was The Big Story. You can send us your feedback on this episode or any other episode by emailing us at hello@thebigstorypodcast.ca or leave a voicemail at 416-935-5935. You can find us on the Seeker app or on all your favorite podcast players. Please rate, review, follow, and share. Thanks for listening.